You're watching Morning at NTV.
All right, let's get to the big story. The big story today will not be your quintessential political discussion, but again, what's politics? Perhaps there's a lot of politics therein. This morning, we want to look at Uganda at a glance, and as we do so, we get to look at the citizenry in this country and try and understand a couple of things. Of course, when you look at Uganda and you juxtapose it against several other countries, there's lots of differences. There's countries which we should be at the same level with. There's countries which we should be better than, but they're better than us. And so that means there's a couple of things that are not in the right place. So what could be the challenges? Could it be, like everyone says, leaders? Could it be you and I? So perhaps everybody has a role to play. Each of us is like a cog in the wheel. And so there's things that we should do that we probably are not doing. But hopefully this morning we get charged up to do those things that we are supposed to do. My guest is Doreen Kanyesije. Doreen is a social analyst. She's also a motivational speaker. So on this rainy day, I'm hoping you're going to motivate us. Good morning.
I hope so. Good morning, Joel.
How are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm well. I was telling you that many years ago, I read an article about you in one of the dailies that you left a big job to become a motivational speaker. That should have been like what, 20 years ago? So
no, am I that old?
That would mean I'm also very old. No, not 20 years ago. Sometime I forget when.
Yes, could have been about 6 years ago.
So you left a big job?
Wait, big is very subjective. I left a job. Your ordinary 9-to-5 job to focus on my passion, which is people development, motivational speaking. And
you left a job that was tethered to the course you did, law.
Yes.
You were a legal advisor.
Yes. Something
that many people clamor to be.
Yes.
And you decided to run away from that.
Yes.
Tell me why.
I think at the end of the day, it was as a result of the exposure I got when I went to do my master's at Warwick University. And
was that in law as well?
Yes, international economic law. I want the whole...
So you're not practicing any of that?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, the exposure was to the effect that, life is much more than the 9-to-5 gig. At the end of the day, we've got to basically focus on what our life's purpose is, what your passion is. Because, believe it or not, every passing day, your life shortens, right? So,
unfortunately.
Yes. So it's better that you enjoy every moment of it. And now that's my philosophy, that I have got to, relish every moment. And the only way I can do that is by focusing on what I love.
Interesting.
Right? So, yes.
So what's your purpose? Even as we get started, what would you say is your purpose?
So my purpose is very much tied into what my personal story has been, what my personal story is, and that's helping people destroy eternal barriers to achieving whatever goal it is they have. It could be happiness, whatever goal it is they have. And for the longest time, that was one of my main impediments. Excuse me. Eternal obstacles, things such as what you believe about yourself, low self-esteem. Very seemingly simple things, but are concepts that are pretty much the basis of, how you go about your life, how you excel at this job that you're doing, Joel. It's all pretty much predetermined by those, what they call the attitudes of the mind, right? How you view yourself, how you view life, period. All
right, we're going to talk about Uganda as that person, as an individual who has got eternal barriers, an individual who's got lots of potential. They can thrive, they should soar, they should fly. But they're not, for a couple of reasons, yeah? So what would you say, looking at this person called Uganda, are its internal barriers, what you call the internal barriers, those things that are impeding it from becoming all that it should be?
In 2015, the 2015 World Bank Development Report, titled Mind, Society and Behavior, compellingly argued that in order for development policies to be of very great impact, it's imperative that development agencies, countries that are developing policies, take into cognizance the different psychology, the ways of thinking of a particular group of people. Now, what that report unearthed, a report that was basically based on behavioral science, is that people's output, their decisions, right, are basically premised on behavioral principles. right? Behavioral principles that they've got to, that we have got to take cognizance of if we're going to develop effective policies. Now, if we come back to your question, right, that basically means that our output, what we do, how well we perform in whatever we do, is basically done within the framework of a certain behavioral framework. If you get what I mean. So then we've got to then understand, which is really, I think, what's a challenge we've had with Uganda, that for the longest time, we've focused on the legal framework, right, on the institutional framework. And we've forgotten that at the end of the day, it's Joel who's got to work that framework. It's Joel who has actually got to implement that legal framework, whatever it is. And that is what the World Bank was saying, that at the end of the day, you've got to understand that, look here, how do people behave? What is their psychology? And, put that within, context. Yeah.
If you had to set a vision for this country, I know we have Vision 2040 and all these different things. They majorly focus on the figures, economics and so on. We'll move from this GDP per capita to this and so on and so forth. But in that context, what do you think we should be aiming at? Because for me, that's vision, something that you see and you go for. It might take a year, it might take 5, whatever the case might be, but that which we should be aiming at and call our vision, whatever it is that we should aspire to be.
Yes.
What do you think that is?
I totally believe during the 19th National Congress, President Xi Jinping said that in order for our country to thrive, the culture has got to thrive. In order for our country to be strong, the culture has got to be strong. Meaning that Vision 2040, Vision 2020, whatever it is, is excellent, right? But at the end of the day, that the culture of Ugandans, and by culture, we're talking about our belief systems, what you believe about life, what you believe about yourself, right? Your values, right? That is all formed within the construct called culture, right? So in order for us to actually achieve whichever vision it is we set for ourselves as a country, we've got to understand that at the end of the day, it's the individual people in Uganda that are actually going to have to effect and implement that vision, right? So we've got to then go further than just, writing down the excellent vision to asking ourselves, okay, our culture, our thought processes, our beliefs, general beliefs as Ugandans, is it in alignment with that vision? And that is what Rwanda has done really well. Rwanda, right? If you look at their anti-corruption framework, the anti-corruption policy, you'll find that, their long-term goal is to have a country that is, infused with values of integrity, a country that's doing really well right now within the anti-corruption index, right? But if you look at their anti-corruption policy, you'll actually ascertain the fact that, they've actually gone ahead to implement activities, things such as education activities within the schools that enable the citizens, the students, to have a mental process, beliefs, values that are in alignment with the vision.
Look, Doreen, somebody will say that we have got a structure of sorts here in Uganda. We have the IGG department, which is meant to ensure there's zero tolerance to corruption in this country. We have laws. We have an anti-corruption court.
Right.
We have got a minister for ethics and integrity. So we have all these different things in place, but we do not seem to be moving, at least, if you are to juxtapose our image against them. What's wrong with us then? And
that's exactly what the 2015 World Development Report was actually discussing. It discussed 3 principles of decision-making, amongst people, amongst the citizens that you're actually targeting, when you're implementing all these anti-corruption policies. It said that, look here, contrary to what we believe, human beings are not, how do I say this? Human beings actually do not make their decisions on the basis of logic. No. We don't say sit down and then make a decision on the basis of logic. No, whatever it is that we do is actually biased. So our decisions are pretty much determined on our beliefs, our history, our values, right? So if you go back to the legal framework that we have in Uganda, policy makers would actually, think that by us putting in place particular policies, particular laws, then logically Ugandans will adhere to the laws and then there will be less corruption and then the country will move forward. But no, behavioral scientists will tell you that no, we are not logical beings. We're not, right?
That's interesting.
We're not logical beings, no, and this is all behavioral science. We're not logical beings. It does not necessarily state that by us having very impunitive laws that then will adhere to the laws, no. human beings are very biased beings. We make decisions within the filters of our beliefs, of our values and all. And that is exactly why in 2010, the UK government actually put in place something they call the Behavioral Insights Team. And basically, the purpose of this team, you know, the philosophy of this team is premised on that very simple truth. That look here, for the longest time we've been putting in place policies that we thought would actually yield too much. But why aren't they yielding much? Same question with Uganda. Uganda has a tsunami of laws, a tsunami of regulatory frameworks. But why is it that it is not translating into the results that we ought to see? Now, the Behavioral Insights team found out that the reason is because we do not contextualize laws to the minds and the thought processes of the national psyche, right? We as Uganda, we do have a national psyche, right? So you've got to contextualize whichever laws, whichever policies to the national psyche and ask yourself, okay, how can we influence Ugandans, right, to make decisions that are in alignment with these laws?
Let's try and break it down for these are good viewers. When you look at this country, there's many challenges. There's the good bits, and we should applaud ourselves for the good that's happening. But then there's the ills that are happening, which we should face squarely. You know, there's through-the-roof corruption in this country. Our moral fiber has been eaten up greatly. Sure. You know, every day you read through the newspapers or watch TV, and there's one case after another of either theft, of kidnap, of murders, and all these different things, you know. Our democratic framework and setup has got issues. And so there's all these many different challenges. And you're saying, away from the laws that we have, because we have failed to contextualize, etc., it's not working. So I'm thinking, what do we do? We must find a solution. What do we do?
Yes, and that's a very excellent question. Again, success always leaves clues, right? I believe that we as Uganda do not have to reinvent the wheel. You know, we've got to look at other countries that have done excellently well, Rwanda, Georgia, and then other higher countries, Norway, the Nordic countries, and ask ourselves, what are they doing? What principles, universal principles, are they implementing, and how can we then translate that to our culture? Let's look at the Nordic countries. Nordic countries have consistently been profiled as one of the least corrupt countries. The UN profiled them as one of the as countries that have people who are the happiest in the whole world. World Happiness Report. The question is why? They've got to be doing certain things right if they're going to appear in those, you know, those indices consistently for, you know, decades. And the answer is very simple. If you look at the Nordic culture, the Nordic countries, they do have an enabling culture, right? And that enabling culture is what they call egalitarianism and janteloven, meaning jantelo. What does that basically mean? Now, Jantelo, what it basically does is that, first of all, it's not a law per se. It's pretty much a set of moral principles that guide the people, right? And basically, Jantelo teaches them that, you know what, you're not any better than anyone, regardless of what family you come from, regardless of how much money you have. You're no better than I am, you know, who is probably poor, right? So you'll find that in Norway, in their everyday culture, right, what happens is that you'll meet a prime minister and you don't have to address them as, oh, Honorable Mr. Prime Minister, Doctor.
Besides, they might be on the train like yourself.
No.
You don't have convoys and so on.
Very true, very true. You don't have to address them by their title. You can actually just say hi, and that's okay. Now, how does that translate into a beautiful country? How does that translate into a thriving economy and all? And here's the thing, that, you see, the Nordics do not attach any value to their titles. The Nordics are more concerned about the quality of their life as opposed to the flamboyance. And actually, Jantelo forbids them, and egalitarianism forbids them from being so flamboyant and being showy and showing us your cars. That's why you'll find a minister riding to work on a bicycle. How does that translate into less corruption in their country? Let's take, for instance, that you're a minister in the Nordic country, in, say, Norway, right? And you're being taught, right, that your identity as Joel does not come out of what you have or how much money you have.
The title and so on.
Or the title, right? So then you're occupying this ministerial post. Say you're the Prime Minister of Uganda, and you're in charge of this very huge budget that affects, you know, trillions and trillions of refugees, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that Joel occupies that office not just as Joel, the Prime Minister. No, Joel occupies that office as Joel, infused with his beliefs about life, infused, if you're a Nordic, infused with your views on janteloven, that I'm not better than no one. My identity does not come out of how much money I have, right? my goal, egalitarianism as they call it, is to be of service to the public. So that means that when it comes to you making decisions pertaining to the country, right, your focus is purely on effecting policies that serve humanity, that serve the refugees.
As opposed to seeking to be served.
As opposed to stealing the money.
I was at a conference sometime, and somebody said that Africa, and for that matter Uganda, has 3 major problems. And this person said the first problem is leadership.
Sure.
The second is leadership. The third is leadership, according to this person. Do you agree with them?
Leadership, and again the question is, what is leadership? Leadership is not just leadership in terms of the president and ministers. You're a leader, Joel. There's personal leadership, right? So yes, leadership within that context of, yes, the general leadership as we know it conventionally, but also personal leadership. And now, which is then why we come back again to this discussion of your personal culture, right? And what should we do? That is where the whole debate about socialization comes in, right? Now, if you go back to Rwanda, right? Let's take a look at what Rwanda is doing. Rwanda must be doing something.
You're annoying many people when you keep talking about Rwanda, but that's okay. Some people don't like us to compare ourselves with people who are doing some things right, and yet it should be okay.
But then how should we
pick
then
the good that they're doing,
yes.
Ignore the bad, but focus on the good.
Pick the good they're doing. So Rwanda must be doing something great. I mean, for yet another year, the 54th globally least corrupt country in Africa, right? 54th globally. So what are they doing right? How are they actually taking these laws and making sure that they are implemented? Because look, we have very excellent laws as Uganda. The challenge is the implementation, right? The challenge is, how do you get Joel, the Prime Minister, the Minister, to actually take this law and implement it? How do you actually do that? And if you look at Rwanda, again, if you look at their policy framework, they focus mainly on that concept we call socialization. They socialize their people, right, to acquire values and ways of looking at life that are in alignment with the goals of the nation, right? Look at, there's something they call that imihigo. Imihigo is basically a performance contract, right? That the government...
Imihigo, that's in Rwanda?
Imihigo, yes. Imihigo is a performance contract that the government, signs with you as a leader.
Which
right?
we have been clamoring to have here.
Yes.
We are yet to do it.
And basically that imihigo tells you, or you commit to us, the people, that you're going to implement these policies for our benefit, right?
So imihigo,
you're going to serve us. So imihigo has now become almost like a socialization tool for those leaders that, look here, I have this performance contract and I've got to actually adhere to the terms that have been set in place, right? They do have actually what they also call Itororo civic education program, right? And basically in that program, they do simple things. Teach the people what integrity is. About a month ago, I was invited to an international school to speak to the students there about the role of integrity. And, 2 seconds into my presentation, a student puts up their hand and says, what is integrity? International school, what is integrity? Now, if you were to ask that same student what corruption is, they will tell you, right? So here's a challenge that we as Uganda are focusing mainly on what it is that we're not doing well, on our social ills, as opposed to putting in place programs that are focused on actively, on pragmatically infusing values, thought processes, beliefs into our minds that enable us. So socialization is very key, but how do we then socialize? We've got to then understand and ask ourselves, who are the influencing agents in our lives, Joel? It's you, the media. It's us, the parents.
Sometimes we do a good job, other times we do a pathetic job. I must concede. But you use the example of Rwanda, and some people will say, there's a couple of things that are happening right in Rwanda, but you talk about these things being inoculated, that your value system should change. And so the question would be, are they stealing less because something has been inoculated on the inside of them, a certain value system, or is it because it's out of fear? Which is a good thing too, you know that if you steal, firing squad or whatever the case might be. But away from that, how do we make that become a part of one's value system? That I don't have to do something right because there's a police officer who is watching, then I get to stick to my lane. But if the fellow is not around, then I can do whatever I want. What's preferred should be that it's a part of me, regardless of whoever is around or whatever camera or whatever the case might be, that I get to do something right. Why? Because it's become a part of my value system, as opposed to I'm doing it just so that I do not get into trouble, because that's the way sometimes people see it the other side.
Let me ask you a question, Joel. Do you ever sit back and struggle with murder? Like you're thinking about, should I kill Doreen, should I not? Do you ever do that?
We all do.
You do.
Well, in the sense of, not that I want to get a gun and kill you.
Not about the brutal aspect.
The brutal one?
Yes.
To do that to somebody?
Kill someone.
No, of course not.
Of course not. And why is that? It's really because that there's a certain value in you that makes not killing a no-brainer, isn't it? Right? That inhibits you from indulging in that behavior. Now.
But it doesn't come just because of the law.
It doesn't come because of the law, right? It's because you've been socialized. Growing up, your parents told you about the respect for human life, religion, God, Christian values told you that you've got to honor. So it's really a part of you. So killing is really out of your mind. Now,
even when you've angered me so much, and I'm thinking,
kill me, I hope. You can't,
of course.
Right? But let's do this. ABC News in 2017 did a report on ISIS, right? And they actually found out that in the Syria ISIS-controlled camps of Syria, right, that you'll find that the terrorists, right, actually teach children how to kill.
So it becomes a part of them.
From 10 to 15 years, these children are taught how to kill. And within their environment, right, within that ISIS environment, you'll find heads being decapitated, people being decapitated. You'll find them playing videos of people being killed, right? So in essence, what the terrorists are doing is that they are socializing. They are making killing, murder, the norm. It's normal to kill. So you'll find that a 15-year-old, a 10-year-old will, without any form of remorse, get up and kill someone or become a suicide bomber. Why is that? Because they have been taught, socialized, behavioral science again, to think that killing is normal, right? It's their new way of life. Now, let's go back to our context. The thing is, how can we make integrity the norm? How can we ensure that when you're in public office, it's normal for you to live a life of integrity as opposed to stealing money, right? Are we only going to depend on the law? No. We all know that human beings are very intelligent, right? When you were in school, those very strict schools, in spite of how strict the rules were, there were always those very naughty people to beat the rules, isn't it? So, behavioral science and common sense tells you that the law is not the only effective way to influence behavior. The law has got to be backed up by enabling culture, enabling norms, enabling ways of looking at life. Now, let's make this more practical. Joe, what were you told by your parents growing up? Probably it could be different. You were told that you've got to go to school, study hard, and get a job and be wealthy, right? Society has taught us that, majority of us, right? So we keep gorging this advice down to our children. Study hard, read hard, go and make money, right? So when I leave school, what's my goal? I've got to make money. As opposed
Sometimes
to,
regardless.
Yes, as opposed to what the Nordics teach their children. You're here to serve humanity, right? Gentle law, egalitarianism. You're here to be of service, right? Look at those two contrasts. So now, either Ugandan who has been told that I've got to finish, get up, go make money, you're building my will to make money against all odds, right? Against all odds. And that means that in spite of how stringent or how great the penalty may be for corruption, my will has been built, right? And my goal is to make money against all odds. Now, it does not really matter how stringent that law is. I will make that money. Does it mean hundreds and millions of refugees dying because of my decision? Heck yes.
When you look at a country like Uganda and its many challenges, all of us in this country have a portion of blame to take. We are all responsible for the good, just like we should be for the bad.
Sure.
But I'm reminded of a saying. There's a Ghanaian professor called Professor Stephen Adey, who once said that leadership is cause, everything else is effect. John C. Maxwell, a leadership scholar, I'm sure you've read one of his books, he once said that everything rises and falls on leadership.
True.
And now let's talk about the context of leadership politically, the civil servants that you talk about.
Yes.
And I know you said every one of us is a leader, and that's important. But in a setting like this, you have got the leaders that run the show, that make decisions that affect everybody else. where is their place and where is the place of the citizen? Because every so often when things go wrong, the citizens will blame the leaders. And many times rightly so, because they pay taxes and they expect deliver the jobs, deliver the health services and so on and so forth, and those things don't come through. And other times the leaders will say, you see, you guys are poor because you're lazy, because you're not working hard, etc., etc. And I'm looking at this maze of confusion and wondering how do we fix this and make sure everybody plays their part.
So obviously leaders have a role to play. Think about the leadership in the conventional way, and that's one of the ways in which Georgia got to where it is right now. They have what they call the principled principle, who actually effected, you know, those principles that enable Georgia to get to where it is now, right? So leaders have a very critical role to play, and actually it's because of these leaders that then we establish new ways of thinking, right? That if you have all these leaders being corrupt, right? What are you teaching me, the child? Or what are you teaching Joe, who is one of their, you know, employees? You're teaching me that, you know what, corruption is really the norm, right? You can actually be corrupt and get away with it. You know, here's what I believe, that now this is really subject to debate, that if Uganda had, should I say anyway, if Uganda had a principled principle, you know, a very strong iron hand that is committed to penalizing any corrupt act, regardless of how small it is, right? Now, that action alone would establish a new norm. Now, it then goes back to the whole behavioral aspect, that the actions of our leaders, right, establish within us a new way of thinking, right? So if you have, say, that principled principle saying everyone will be penalized regardless of if you're a chicken thief or the prime minister, you will be penalized for your corrupt acts. Now, that iron hand establishes within us, first of all, a fear and a new way of behavior, wherein then integrity becomes the norm. So yes, leadership does have a role to play, but then it's very cyclical. The question is, why aren't our leaders actually effecting those policies? These leaders are a product of our society, of our social environment, right? They live within the same social environment. So it's very cyclical that, look here, at the end of the day, yes, leaders have a role to play, but you've got to understand that these leaders are born out of a social environment. They are born out of our values, our beliefs as Ugandans as a whole. So we've got to ask ourselves, right, which is what PLO, Professor Lumumba said, that we are partakers, we are co-creators in our misery. Us as Africans, you cannot just say that it's one leader. No, it's us as Africans who've all established a way of thinking. Do you know that the African Barometer did a study, and they found that in majority of these sub-Saharan African countries where corruption is very endemic, right, 3/4 abhor corruption, right? But 3/4 again are participants, right? And that's why the whole debate about how transparency, being transparent, unearthing the social ills in a country actually breeds more corruption, right? If you, for instance, now you know that Uganda is a very corrupt country, right?
Everyone knows.
So everyone knows, but you know what that breeds, right? If you look at the behavioral science of it, it means that for you as Joe, you definitely believe that corruption is really normal at a very subconscious level.
So how do we change this? Is it in schools? Is it going to be in homes, you know, parents? Is it what? How do we get started? And
that's what Professor Lumumba again said, that we've got to go back to the basics. I really believe that we've really complicated this whole process. We just focus on the policy framework, the institutional framework. That's very key. We cannot do without it. The Nordic countries are not doing well only because of their culture. No, they have supportive structures. They have very strong labor unions. They have very strong laws. So the culture and the legal frameworks, the institutional frameworks work hand in hand. Now, what does that mean? That means that whereas we've been focused on all these institutional frameworks for the longest time, we've got to then come back to the basics. And the basic is this, the family unit, right? What do you teach your child about their identity? Who are you, Joel? Is your identity predetermined by how much money you have in the bank? Or are you much more than that, right? Because you've got to understand, as behavior scientists tell us, that we will always act in a way that's in consonance with who we believe we are, right? So we've got to go back to the basics. As parents, we've got to teach our children what their true identity is, right? We've got to teach them about the importance of pursuing a purpose as opposed to pursuing money, right? We're here for much more than money. And actually the thing is, I totally believe that when you pursue a purpose, in the long run, the money will come. And that is a simple thing that Scandinavians are teaching the children, right? How do they think, right? Then that's the family unit, the church. You've been to church, and all the front row seats are for who? The wealthy, eh? Right? Now, what are you teaching me, the pauper?
And sometimes they, you know, take to church some of the money they stole the day before.
And we celebrate them. Woohoo, you've done really well. What are you teaching me, right? Churches are very strong socialization agents, right? So corruption, all the social ills have got to be abhorred, right? Listen, the greatest penalty you can give a human being is not taking them to prison. No. The greatest penalty you can give a human being is the social penalty, where society rises up and says, you're coming to our church, we will not give you that front seat that you're used to. Go to the back. We won't even welcome you. That is the greatest penalty. Right?
I'm looking at the parent whom we are expecting to do these things, you know, nurture their children the right way. But I'm not making excuses really, but some parents don't know any better because of the way they grew up, what they grew up seeing. They are, you know, to put it plainly, a mess. And you know, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, and yet we should, because what they have, they pass on to their children. How do we help them? Because if we're going to expect that parents are going to pass on certain values to their children, and they don't have these values, they cannot pass them on. So
the whole time, you cannot teach a dog old tricks. You cannot teach an old dog new tricks. How do you say?
That's what people say.
Yeah.
But we must find a way around that. Really.
Joel, that's false, right? And the falsehood of that is pretty much, you know, an earth by virtue of what behavioral science teaches us and how our brains actually work. Now, do you know that from cradle to grave, you maintain the ability to learn new things, Joel, right? Whether you're 90 years, how is Queen Elizabeth, you know, being an effective leader over, you know, Great Britain now? She's 92 now, right? From cradle to the grave, you maintain the ability. It's what they call neuroplasticity. Your brain is plastic, your brain is malleable. You have the ability to consistently learn new things. Now, parents, not me, I'm so young, the older parents. The older parents have got to realize, have got to realize that, first of all, they've got to take cognizance of the fact that we're living in very different times now. You know, the moral values that they had then, you know, were easy for them to implement. Now they've got to understand the different times that we're, you know, in now. So then they've got to know that they have the ability to learn these new things. So what if you're born in a broken family, right? The way God created our minds is that we have the ability to consistently learn these new things. So learn the new things, right? As a parent, in light of what's happening in Uganda now, what values do you believe will protect your child, right? Inoculate them from whatever it is that they might be facing later on in life. It's not just the education as we know it. No, it's the values, it's the self-esteem, it's the self-worth, it's their identity. So then you've got to learn these things, right? And then pass them on to your children. That effective. But again, I cannot live without talking about this, the media. One of the greatest pains I have is around January and February, and I don't know when the results are released for S6s, S4s. Man, triple AB, you know, success story, name it. Look, I don't have any beef for those stories.
Should you celebrate them, somebody would ask?
I don't have any beef. I was actually a triple AB student who was actually profiled by the Monitor in my days, right? I tell you this, and this whole goes back down to my personal story. Look, I was an A student, you know, got all the excellent grades in school, went to work, given a partial scholarship to a PhD. A student, right? So I ticked the box of what society calls excellent education. But when I came back, life happened to me, right? A couple of things happened. And for the longest time, I was depressed. I was in utter depression. Now, my question was, where is this education that I had excellently acquired? Why wasn't this education pulling me out of this doldrum called life to enable me to rise, which is what education is supposed to do, right? You're supposed to be educated to be able to be of value to the marketplace. Now, my question was, what was the inhibiting factor in this whole equation? And my answer was very simple. You see, much as my intellect was educated, right? My emotional intellect was not educated at all. You get it, right? So our education has then got to go back to focusing on things such as educating the beliefs of our children, educating the values of our children, right? So in order for us to, excuse me, in order for us to then be able to unearth this value out of our children, we've got to understand that, look here, you know, much as intellectual excellence is very important, emotional excellence is even more important.
I know you every so often get to speak to what I would call influencers, whether it be in politics, business, media, and so on. Do you tell them these things, and how do they receive them? Because I'd like to think that's a good place to start, because somebody has got to be seen to take the lead. These countries that you talk about and so on, I don't know if you've read about the Singapore story and several others.
Yes.
You know, there were influencers that everybody looked to, and when they saw them do certain things, slowly but surely, the wheel began to take a different direction altogether. So do you tell them these things? How do they receive them? Do they make sense to them?
No, initially they don't make sense to them, because we're used to the proverbial, or it's got to be the leaders, or it's a country, or it's a policies that have got to change in order for Uganda to change, as opposed to, no, well, that's effective, that's very critical, but you as a parent has got to change, you as a church has got to change, you as the media has got to change. And again, back to what we're talking about, you've got to change from just profiling the triple ABs, the end, to profiling the process. How about you tell me about a child who got triple A, triple D, right? But in the process, they lost their mother, they lost their dad, but they still persisted to the end. And in essence, you're teaching me, you're socializing me to believe that processes are very critical, that it's important that I stick to the process, not just to the end, right? So then, however, if you tell leaders that or tell parents that, they don't get you. They'll tell you, look here, Doreen, at the end of the day, it's just money that counts. It's the end, as opposed to the process. What does process have to do with it? But tell that to the UNHCR director who was called home, even if the claims have not been validated as of now. You know, if, say, we took the claims as being true, the one thing that was missing in him, I don't believe it's true, but it could be integrity, that simple value, in spite of him being very educated. But a very simple value brings down your career, brings down your life, right? So it's very simple. It's, again, like PLO says, we've got to go back to the basics to understand that values, beliefs are very critical to not just our development, but also to societal development. Okay,
my time is up. We need to wrap this up. You've spoken very heavy things. I'm sure people are trying to excogitate over them, make sense out of them, and hopefully they can act on them. What would be your last charge to us as a people?
So my last charge to us would be that you first of all got to understand that you're much more than your job, than your titles, than your pretty face or your handsome look, your very good suit, Joel. You're much more than that.
Without a doubt.
And what does really understanding that at a very subconscious level do to you, Joel? It liberates you to be the Joel that you were created to be. The Joel who's actually here to impact the world with your talents and abilities. Now, if you have trillions of Joels with that kind of mindset, as Ugandans, as citizens of Uganda, imagine what Uganda will be like, right? If we have Joels who actually believe that they are here to infuse Uganda with their talents, with their abilities, right? Imagine what this country would be like. You'd have a country where people are not just here to serve their personal needs, but they're here to serve needs, and in doing that, their personal needs are met. So personal culture, very critical to our national culture and in the long term, our national development.
There you are. Hopefully we can act on these things and get better. Doreen Kanyesije, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm reminded of a quote by one-time US President Abraham Lincoln, who once said that whatever you are, be a good one. So are you a sweeper? Are you a lawyer? Are you a doctor? Are you a politician? Are you a border rider? Be a good one. Do that job as well as you possibly can, and things will get better for this good country. That's it for The Big Story. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joel Senyonyi. Good morning.